Hey gang, welcome back to Inverted Pursuits Laboratory. This week we're going to be taking a look at how to build a rocket from some things that you have around your house. So this is actually a rocket I built back in probably middle school or high school. I call it Eagle, as you can kind of see my handwriting there. Obviously it's taken some hard impacts, but it's actually made out of things that I just had lying around my house at the time, and I decided I wanted to build a rocket. This is actually the first rocket I ever built 100% from the ground up that wasn't an Estes kit. Still at Estes scale and very much inspired by everything Estes did. This is where I started. As you can see, it's got some simple cardboard fins. It's made out of a paper towel roll tube. I've got some more paper towel roll tube used as my motor mount. I've got a straw with tape wrapped around it for my launch lug, and a simple manila folder that I used to make the nose cone out of. There are obviously several ways you can do shock cord. You can either just get some elastic or nylon simple cord. A lot of those things you can buy spare shock cords and spare parachutes from places like Hobby Lobby to then be able to like glue in different places. This used to have basically a mating piece to allow these to come on and off, and it was some pretty simple way to build myself a quick rocket. So we're going to go through how I went about that and build ourselves a rocket today. So the place you really want to start is usually with your body tube. So if you've got like an old paper towel roll tube, that is a great place to start. You also, if you can find an old toilet paper roll, these are great to have around. If you can get really lucky, you can find like the hefty cardboard tubes from wrapping paper. And that's what this is some of, which this actually is almost perfect 38 millimeter tube. So it'll fit a 38 millimeter on the inside and actually fits inside. Like it's almost perfect. It's just not phenolic, it's just cardboard. But this is actually a perfectly 38 millimeter tube that I found in a piece of wrapping paper. There's also some good tubes inside of things like the Cricut material comes wrapped around some good tubes. There's several different things you can use around to build this stuff out of. So for what we're doing, I'm actually going to use this 38 millimeter tube. It's a little bit stouter, and I really like the way it is since I was able to find it. But of course, you can use a simple paper towel roll tube. I will be using the toilet paper tube as my motor mount tube. Now, you're thinking, well, that's a really big tube, and it's actually bigger in diameter by just a little bit than my body tube I've got here. And like, here's a 29 millimeter motor that like, how's that going to fit in there? Or here's a 38 millimeter motor. Like, what's the plan here? Well, a good place to start is take a pair of scissors and simply cut it straight in half. Now you've got the ability to basically fold it inside itself. And you can choose your motor, like say I want to fly on a 24 millimeter motor, which I haven't figured out what this one should fly on yet. And wrap it inside here, and then you'll be able to like wrap it around, and you can make it as thick or as thin as you want. So you can wrap it either fully around, or you can trim it where it like ends, but then glue and tape are your best friend, and you'll be able to do that. So we're actually going to go ahead and start with this, and I'm going to be using some Elmer's glue and a little bit of masking tape. So I've gone ahead and decided that I really want this to be a 24 millimeter rocket motor, flying something a little bit bigger. Eagle flew on a 38 back in the day, but since we're going a little bit bigger, I feel like a 24 is a good step. 29 just seems like I mean, man, it's really pushing what I could do. And 29 is still not outside of what a low power impulse is, as long as you're smart about what you fly on. But to keep this a little more kid friendly, I think we're actually going to go ahead and stick with the 24, so you're sitting closer in on your Estes hobby size. So there's a couple ways to do this, whether you're trying to do forward retention, like this plastic motor has forward retention, or I've actually got an old Q-Jet here. It's a little bit closer to an Estes that doesn't have forward retention. So what I did is I wrapped tape around the end. This actually has about 1/2 inch tape. I would actually prefer to do like 3/8 to 1/4 inch of tape around the base and basically create the lip you want so that then your motor will push against the inside edge here. But I'm actually going to use this spent motor as my form. And so I know that seems a little weird to have spent motor tubes or spent motors around in general, but I always use them for forms and quick size checks to make sure I didn't like drip epoxy in a place I didn't mean to drip epoxy or get glue somewhere glue doesn't belong. But we're going to keep wrapping this around to try and make it as tight as we can. And then I've actually got painter's tape, not masking tape, but really doesn't matter. And so our initial goal here is to get this as tight as we can. And we're gonna just kind of size check this. So I can get my motor in and out. Life's good. Yep, that's what we want. I've got a pencil and I'm gonna go ahead and mark where the edge should be. This is just a good way for when I'm gluing it back up to make sure I get back to where I want it to be. Same old, same old. It also gives me a pretty good space on how much glue is going to go on this. So we'll knock open our Elmer's glue as my motor runs away. And we're going to just go ahead and put down a light. Oh, this is still clogged, ain't it? It is. Let me get that properly unclogged. We'll get some Elmer's glue in here. And we're not putting very much on. This bottle's also extremely clogged for whatever reason. It's not letting a lot of glue out. But the thing is, I don't need tons of glue to get this to seat. I need just enough. So we're gonna take this, and you're gonna get glue on your hands. It's just kind of inevitable. If you've done rocketry build projects before, you just kind of know glue getting on you is part of the drill. I'm also definitely going to use the table to my advantage. The table is your friend. Like, the table is really your friend. So initially I'm just going to get some basic tape to hold it down, and then we're going around with that tape. And I'm using the table to help me roll it all smooth as I possibly can. So that's a good place to leave that for the moment. We could take the motor in and out, but we're actually going to be using the motor as our form, so we want to leave the motor in there. So we could also trim this down, but since there's a chance of using it for a longer motor in the future, we're going to leave it the length it's at. And then of course you want to get some paper towels to clean your hands off. Alright, so next we're on to a slightly more enjoyable step in my opinion. We're actually going to be designing our fins. I've got a small little piece of graph paper here, and I'm going to kind of try and aim you guys down at the tabletop a little more for the remainder of this build so you can really see what's going on. So I got a piece of grass paper here that I can use for drawing out like a basic fin shape. So I'm going to use the dark green line that I happen to have here as kind of my bottom edge, and think about like how tall, high up along the rocket I want to come. Each square should be about, each dark square should be about 1/2 inch. I can confirm that with a tape measure that I don't have close at hand. Yeah, each darker square is 1/2 inch, and then each little square is 1/8 of an inch. So if I go 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, roughly like 4 inch line right there, I think about having like a 4-inch rocket fin. My previous rocket, which was a little bit smaller, had like 2.5-inch root cords. So I think maybe like a 4-inch cord for a little bit longer rocket might be a good place to start. I want to give it a little bit of a classic IPL look, I think. So we're going to come 1 inch out. We're going to do a 1/2 inch up by 1 inch over. And I'm going to come up come up 1 inch here, maybe 1.5 inches. Yeah, 1.5 inches looks better. And then I'm going to just kind of freehand a line here and end up with a pretty nice looking little fin that we can enjoy using. So that's going to be our fin shape. I think that'll give us a very nice looking rocket, kind of a classic style to go with. We could do a lot more fun things if we wanted to. We could make some big D loop out and a arc in, or I mean, even if we wanted to have more fun, we could come like to here with a line, come down, and then shoot out more aggressively. It would give us a slightly more like aggressive profile. And of course, I'm going to mention, like, I haven't done any real sims on this. I'm just doing like I would call gut math right now. It's just kind of like what I think I could do. But I still like the idea of the bigger fin. Bigger fin gives me a little bit stronger CP pull back. And then I'm going to take my scissors and cutting on my lines. Cut this fin out, and this will become my template for making the fins. Alright, so now we've got a fin template, and we'll need some material to cut the fins out of. I've got some old cardboard that a spool of 3D printer filament came in. This is some old Inland from like Micro Center. I've actually found it's a very sturdy filament box and a decent cardboard when used for structural needs. So we're going to trim just the lid off this box with an X-Acto knife. Not actually sure how much of this is on camera at the moment. Oh, there's a sticker on the back, isn't there? Yeah, there was. So I've got an X-Acto knife I used. You could also do it with a pair of scissors. I just tend to prefer the use of an X-Acto blade. If you're doing this with your kids, this is definitely the spot where the adults should step in and do the X-Acto knife parts, or go ahead and do this step with scissors. Wow, that was hard. So now I've got a fin. A thing I really need to pay attention to is on my cardboard here, I've got corrugation lines that run this way. So that tells me some things about how I want to cut this fin out. So if I lay the fin on here like this and cut it out, there's a chance of it creasing and folding over a lot more easily than if I were to turn the fin sideways and cut it out, because now the way it's going to crease is along, basically our body tube would have to break for this to want to crease, and so it increases the strength. There's some people that'll do the like, oh, cut it at an angle, and you get these like really nice ridges at an angle down, which you can do. If you cut it at like the wrong angle, you can still end up with weak points. So you've got to know like what angle you're wanting to cut at. So I've always just gone with like a perfect perpendicular. Ensures that I have a good amount of strength all the way around. So just kind of placing it on here, taking my pencil and doing some quick tracing. I end up with a fin shape transferred over. And I'm not being overly precise with this, but there's my fin. Then I'm personally going to use an X-Acto knife to cut it out, but you can do this by hand if you want, or any other sort of things. There's also got like enough space here to get one out of there. I'm gonna probably try and cut all of mine the exact same way so that I'll have a brown side and a black side consistently across, since I am gonna end up having a pattern on this, mostly because I cut it out using a filament box. Now this is really just not the end of the world. I've made a lot larger rockets that have patterns on them because I used it out of cardboard that I just had lying around. So as long as you're okay with it, it's really not the end of the world. And I am just kind of doing this with one line ending on the other's line, so then I can kind of more happily nest the cuts. You can definitely space things off more. It depends on your preference. I was just curious to see if I could get this to a point where, nope, I can't get all four on one all the way across. So I will do one on one of these side tabs, since I couldn't get it all on the central four. There's not enough depth here either to get it, but could have made a smaller fin, just really didn't feel like it. These are definitely the definition of oversized fins, and it's probably going to make this rocket hella overstable. I will do some quick sim tests to check that and make sure it's not too overly overstable. But then the next step is to simply take your X-Acto knife and cut it out. Parents, if you're doing this with your kids, this is a good spot for you to take over, or you can just set your kids loose with safety scissors. The fins may not come out quite as nice, but for a kid's first scratch-built rocket, it's really not the end of the world, especially if you're sticking with like an 18mm size. You're barely going to notice performance degradation. I didn't notice performance degradation, I should say. Now, I know there are going to be some that say, like, oh, this rocket's small enough, you could tumble recover it. And you're right, I agree. You could definitely tumble recover this rocket. Wouldn't even need a parachute. That's 100% how Eagle flew once or twice when I first designed, or did that design, is it tumble recovered. It's not, like, my favorite thing to do is tumble recover, but I 100% sell a rocket that is tumble recover on my website, so I can't say tumble recover is a bad design. And then I am choosing to cut on the inside edge of all the lines just to try and make sure. Now, you will occasionally get a point where you're going to bend these, and that's not the end of the world. Just really try not to. I've gone ahead and made 4 fins. You really don't need 4 if you're doing a 3-fin design. You can do it with 3. If you want 4, you can do it with 4. It really depends on your preference. Up until I did high power rocketry, all my rockets were 3-fin design, or 4-fin design, sorry. And so it's really up to the flyer on what you want to do with your rocket, because there are just so many options. Three-fin has a very sleek look that you can enjoy. I should just be able to punch that right on out. Oh, I have a sticker on the back here that's catching me up. Not the end of the world. I'm gonna have a $20 sign potentially on that one. But we can very quickly just cut these fins completely out. Always be sure if you're doing this with an X-Acto, you recap your X-Acto. So I've got now 4 fins. I also have my body tube, or my motor tube drawing. That's kind of why I started there. Not all of them are perfectly square. That's not the end of the world. You want to find the one that is probably the least square, and that's the one to like toss out. But it's also really not the end of the world if you've got one that's not super square. This one is my most bent fin, I'm actually going to do a 3-fin design for this rocket. So I'm going to choose 3 fins here. All look about the same. I'm going to toss this one out. And so I've got my 3 fins that will go on my body tube. The end of your body tube that you choose for being motor versus nose cone really doesn't matter. Just kind of make your determination. This side's got more dents and damage on it, so I'm going to choose this to be the motor side. Side I'll glue my whole motor assembly to. There are several ways to like center this motor assembly in there. You can cut circular discs out of cardboard and stack them up. I've done that dozens of times. You can also cut a strip of cardboard and wrap it then around your motor tube to thicken this up. Kind of depends again on how much weight you want to put where and what your preference is on that. And there's just several different little things you can do to go back in there to make this the like type of motor you want. I know a trick I've done before, if you don't want to wrap tape around the end of your motor to retain it, I mean, you will want to wrap some tape around the body of your motor to like help hold it in, unless you take a paper clip and build a retainer, which we'll probably go ahead and do with this, is build a paper clip retainer. This is a little bit looser than I would like to have inside a body tube. You can also glue like the back end of an old Estes motor. So if you cut an old Estes motor, like a 1/4-inch sliver out of the tube and glue it in here, it'll be a forward retention for one of the larger motors. The way you could do it is make something like that. But this is an old 24mm Estes E12. You can see I wrapped tape around. But if you're wanting to just use like a chunk of this as a forward retention, you can take an X-Acto blade and go around, and just as long as you're slow and careful, you can cut this thing off. It'll take me probably an hour to do it. Another way to do it is just take a saw and cut this off. So I'm not going to just keep doing that to cut it off. It's not how I plan to retain my motor at this time. So like I'm just not going to continue that. Another fun little hack, 24mm, like Estes motors, make great adapters to 38. Their inside bore is a 38. So if you take one of those, cut the nozzle off the end, you'll end up with a 38 to 24 adapter. In case you don't want to buy that. So I also found, this is an old thing, this is actually a paper straw that is a launch lug adapter. This is actually something that's older than I am. My dad had these back in the 70s when he was a kid making rockets, and I've got a handful of them that I still use here and there. Especially when I've done replicas, I'll cut a chunk of this up for a replica of an old rocket, since this is what the old rocket would have had on them. But I've got these, and so this is actually what I'm going to go ahead and use, just because I kind of want to give this rocket a little bit of an older feel, even though it's going to have some very homemade parts. I also kind of want to give it the like homemade vibe. So the next like really big step is going to be going ahead and mounting your motor tube. I always do this before I mount the fins. It just makes my life easier. Mounting the motor tube once you've mounted the fins is kind of a pain in the butt. The best way to do this, really, there is not a best way to do this or even a best practice. There's just doing it. So I'm actually going to try the route of wrapping. So I'm going to remove that, get this flange down into a square piece of cardboard. And now what I'm going to do here, well, apparently I'm going to have to cut that again. One more try. There we go. So I'm going to take this over the edge of a table, and I'm actually going to like pull it and round it. Oh, I just broke part of that. That's fine. I don't need that much of this. But just kind of use your hand to roll and round it around a corner. Let me make sure you guys, yeah, you guys can kind of see what I'm doing down here. just kind of take and roll it. This is actually a very common trick used by like the Flight Test gang. If you go check out their YouTube channel, if you do any hobby RC flying, they use this for their foam board airplanes, and it's a tactic that I borrowed for this because it works so dang well. If you crease your cardboard, that's fine. Unlike with a foam board airplane, it does not matter if we crease the heck out of this cardboard. Our goal is to be able to bend it and then basically roll this around our motor body to make a thicker section. I don't even know if that's thick enough yet to like plug us into here. And it's like partially thick enough, but it's really not. So there's a couple different ways we can look at going about this to make it better. Predominantly where I'm actually going to start, so I'm going to go ahead and just say I really want to start with this piece. So I'm going to use a piece of tape, and I'm going to take my motor tube, and I'm going to go ahead and start kind of like roll wrapping this around. It's not perfect, but it starts to get the vibe I want very quickly, especially when you're doing this just kind of 100% making it up as you go along. If you also have CA glue rather than Elmer's glue, you can do a lot of this assembly with CA glue rather than Elmer's. Elmer's is just an easy one I know most people have around, especially when you have kids and you're crafting with them. I will also note my motor tube is not perfectly round, and that is still a heck of a lot of play. I probably have it up to about the diameter of a 29mm motor at this point. So, a good next step. Now we're going to go ahead and just try that. We're going to try and work with more scrap. I know, mixed feelings, but I like scrap. And we're gonna just round this guy off, just like we did the last one. We're gonna round it off. And now, if you have a sharper edge to use, rather than like the edge of my counter here is actually rounded. If you have like a sharp edge, you'll actually be able to get a tighter roll to this going, rather than as shallow of one as I've got going. Also, for the start of this, I'm going to want a little bit squarer of an edge across the whole thing, so we're going to lose some width and trim that a little more square. I'm also going to just kind of tape. And a good spot to start is exactly where you ended with the last one. So I went ahead and lined that up such that my two pieces kind of start where the other ends. I also did realize I did this completely backwards. So again, a good way you can roll your tape back, run it up to your edge. It's an easy way to gain thickness to like not line this edge up, but I like lining the edge up. And then we're gonna go ahead and roll this on, give it a quick fit check. That's actually perfect. That's exactly what we want, which is great to hear. So what we're gonna go ahead and do is unroll this, and then I'm actually gonna go ahead and cut the tape here rather than untaping it, so that we end up with just a really long piece. And then I'm gonna go ahead and, I haven't figured out what's wrong with this glue bottle yet, but don't really feel like dealing with it at the moment. I'm gonna kind of go ahead and just smear some Elmer's through here. I do have a glue brush I'll go ahead and use rather than doing this 100% by hand. Now it's not really a glue brush, it's just a paint brush. A glue brush would be better, but I don't have one of those at the moment. So we're gonna go ahead and just kind of, that was way too much. But we're gonna go ahead and smear some Elmer's glue around in here. And smear it around on this side as well. So again, big Elmer's glue mess. And that's exactly what we want. We want a big Elmer's glue mess. Because more Elmer's glue means higher likelihood this stuff actually sticks the way we want it to. Again, I've now got a paper towel, good for cleaning your hands up with. Also good for wrapping that with. So again, we're gonna just take our glued guy, start working our way around. And you can do it as fast or as slow as you want. I'll always recommend slower is a little bit better than fast. And I know someone's going to call me out on the fact that technically my glue on the first wrap has not dried yet. And you're right, it hasn't. But that's also the joy of Elmer's glue, is I can do a lot of steps all at once. And then I'm going to go ahead and take some blue tape here. And I'm going to do one full wrap. I can take this off later if I really need it off. Actually, I want to put that back in. I also want to go ahead and try and like hold down some edges here all the way along. Try and make sure they get a good seal. And then we'll do one more fit check on this tube. And yeah, it still fits really nicely in there. If anything, I'll have to remove some of that tape to help it line up. But then we can just take this and set it off to the side for now. This is either just a good time to go ahead and take a break, come back to it the next day, or you can move on to your nose cone, which the nose cone tends to be a little more difficult. I really recommend, if you're going to do the nose cone, if you don't want to like 3D print something that could fit on this, there's easily something you could go 3D print, which would be like my loving area, because I love 3D printing parts. But I also feel like stick to the true nature of this kind of build, that I should go ahead and do this out of a manila folder like I originally intended to. So now I am going to go ahead and pull this paper towel tube that I tossed out earlier back in, and I'm going to cut a band out of it. I think it's about 3/4 to 1 inch band I'm cutting at the moment. It doesn't have to be perfectly square, and the whole point of having the paper towel tube or multiple paper towel tubes, toilet paper tubes around, is that you have a chance to try multiple times. So you want to like come here and look at like, oh, how does this seat in there? And actually the other side is what I want to use for my motor. But so a quick way to like tell how does this seat in there is to just kind of cut it in half and set it in there, and then you can pull it out. So now you've got about where it sits, and I should have already had tape ready for this. It's a good spot, especially if you're working with a parent or a friend. Have them cut a piece of tape for you, or like myself, you just get really good at doing this stuff alone and can remove tape with one hand and a few fingers. So just a quick like taped it together, another real quick hold down tape piece for fit checks, and you want to see like how well does that actually fit in there. And again, my paper towel tube, and it's not exactly round, and this is actually a little too large at the moment, so I actually will want to go ahead and peel it back a bit. It's also often good to mark it with a pencil where you were at. That's something I did not do, and I'm kind of regretting now. But another way to do this is, now that I've got tape on there, so I can come in with this a little small, slide it on in, and then gently open it up. And use that to get me a decent initial size. So that's not perfect by any means, but it's a good place to start. It's a good size. You can say, oh, okay, it's within a little bit, and I could reasonably argue it'll hold up, or with a little bit of extra tape I can add some stiffness if the LCO wants to see that. I mean, if you're flying this in your backyard, you're going to find out pretty quickly if it works or not. Alright, so the next step is to actually cut out our nose cone. So the template is just basically a nose cone template that I downloaded online. And yes, it is like way too big, but that's okay. Link for this will be in the description below, and you can download it, or just taking a quick pair of scissors to her and cutting her out. And this doesn't have to be perfect, because obviously we're going to trim this down again. Like, it's not going to stay this massive. Alright, so we've got our nose cone, get all the extra stuff off to the side, and then we're going to actually just start with a couple pieces of tape being all we need. To make our nose cone. Now, this is the part that is often the trickiest, is figuring out how to get the like tip to perfectly curl around. And it's going to be like especially hard because we're doing it out of paper at the moment. And like paper just doesn't want to do it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and line this up at the bottom first and then work my way up. Kind of assuming that if I can get the bottom to line up, I probably can get the top to line up. So I just got the paper to line up. Also, I should mention the paper isn't going to be our final nose cone either. Like, we're just using this to get our template. Our final one will be out of the manila folder that I have here in front of me. That'll give us the rigidity we need. Likewise, also, like if you have a 3D printer and want to 3D print a nose cone, you can just measure your body tube diameter and your inside diameter and just extrude a nose cone. So now we've got pretty much our cone shape, and we know that that fits up inside of it, and pretty much I can feel where it sits and already just do a like, all right, we need to take off, that is covered in glue, I need to take off at least that much of it. And so I'm just initially gonna go ahead and come down below and just cut to get it shorter, because that's really the first thing I need, is I need it shorter. And yeah, it makes an awful shape, which I can kind of start to like even out a little bit better, make it look a little nicer, add a little more tape to make sure it stays together while we do the next stage. So next thing we're going to do is actually like get this seated up in here and go, okay, so it would seat about like that. My body tube will seat in here like such, And so my nose cone is going to look roughly like that. And then with a Sharpie or a pencil, looks like we're using a Sharpie today because I got my pencil covered in epoxy. I'm actually going to go ahead and come around. You kind of want to like also make sure it looks square. And I come around and I'm just going to initially do an impression on there. So because it's paper, we can just press on and give it the like look we want. And so there's just a little crease that then I'm gonna mark with my Sharpie to make it easier to follow. And like that's not perfect, but it's pretty close to what I want. Also, this is a scratch-built rocket that you're making at home, so like perfect's a little relative. Trying to make it so I can get my scissors in here easier to come around, and I'm just going to end up cutting with only the tip of the scissors, and we're just going to gently work our way around on that line. And we end up with a really, really nice looking nose cone that we can like now go ahead and do a like, oh yeah, if I set that in there and I set this in here, I end up with this like nose cone-ish shape. And it's not perfect by any means. Oftentimes a better route with these is to go ahead and actually leave an overhang when you're doing a nose cone like this, which I did not, and I wish I had. So it's actually what I'm going to do as I go to trace it out onto our manila folder, as I'm going to add just a little bit extra space. So now that I've got it cut out, I can try and wipe a bunch of our mess off to the side. I'm gonna use some tape real quick to lay that out. And like this is honestly not the greatest way to do that. Let's go ahead and use an edge of the manila folder to our advantage. Use an edge here. Come out another like 1/4 inch around. And then just trying to maintain that like roughly 1/4 inch spacing. Go ahead and make the arc around, and then I'm going to add a dash there. So now when I pick this up, I need to add that back, and then I need to add my dash marks there to help me figure out where it goes. So we can go ahead and get this on sliced out. So now we've got that. One thing we're going to want to do is start getting it a nice little curve going, because we're going to have to wrap this around, but we don't want it to be like an even curve. We want it to be a conical curve. So it's easiest to like hold the tip against and wrap it around like a pen or something. Here, like what I'm doing, basically all we're trying to do is just give it a gentle conical crease so it starts to want to have a cone shape to it. You can also do this across the corner of a table. And you just want to start working that cone shape into existence and do it as gently and carefully as you can. So your goal is to be able to overlap everything. And some things aren't going to overlap perfectly. Man, I really don't know if we can hear the 3D printer in the background right now. My new printer Bambi is running, and she's a little loud. I really need to get a muffler for the fan on the back. Okay, so if I get that in there, didn't quite get that right. That's okay. So what we're going to do is use one long piece of tape along this entire edge. Then we're going to go ahead and get a little bit of glue. It would be helpful if this bottle of glue decided to work today. Oh, it's going to work today. Sweet. We're going to just kind of gently run some glue up and down this corner here. I'm actually going to overlap it quite a bit because I have a feeling this nose cone is going to be a little tighter than I'd anticipated. And then we're going to use the table to our advantage. And try to line this up with where I want it to sit. And then I'm just going to keep rolling with the tape. Try and get that tape as securely aligned as I can. The point being, this tape could actually stay on there if we wanted to. It does not have to come off. On which note, I'm going to go ahead and cut some little slices here to allow me to fold the tape to the inside. But we're gonna just do a little snip snip there, a gentle tear. And so basically I've added now the tape kind of to the structure of the nose cone, and I end up with this pretty dang nice looking nose cone shape that I really wanted, as well as I've got the tape holding the glue to each other. And it's not like 100% the way I'd wanted it to line up. Have a little seat in there. I can double check on the back end here. Yep, it's got some overlap now, which is actually going to give us a really nice seat on there. It's going to ensure that things go really well. So next thing, we can actually keep working on the nose cone if we want to. I usually recommend at this point, this is where people need to find something to stand the nose cone upside down with. I am probably going to try and use an old motor. I think that'll make sense. You can also use like a Dixie cup or something. And my whole goal at this point is to align that piece. And so what I'm actually going to do is take a piece of blue tape, cut it in half lengthwise with my X-Acto, and basically start to gently align the shoulder of my nose cone with where I want it to sit on the nose cone. So get the tip of my nose cone aligned axially and some of that stuff. And then we're just gonna basically make a quick cross to hold it all together. And then the next thing we're gonna do really kind of seems counterintuitive, but it has always worked great for me, and that is basically to just pour a butt ton of Elmer's glue down inside this joint and let it gravity feed down. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but that's completely and totally okay. Because our whole goal here is to both partially weight the nose cone as well as seal the shoulder to the nose cone. Now, if you've got like a toothpick or something around, you can sit here and like kind of shimmy it down in there. Let me find something. I don't care if I get covered in glue because I don't have a toothpick down here at the moment. Should I have something in my epoxy working things? Yes, I do. So I'm going to basically use a barbecue skewer instead of a toothpick, but same vibe. And I'm just going to gently massage the glue down into the shoulder interface. And for some that think like, oh, I added way too much glue, you probably didn't actually add enough. Elmer's glue shrinks when it dries because it's a water-based glue, so as the water evaporates out, it actually will get smaller on you. And if an amount of it runs down into the tip of the nose, even better. You end up with a little more weight where you want the weight. So from there, we will just let this basically sit and dry. So we're gonna just move it off to the side for the moment. Try and keep it as upright as we possibly can so glue doesn't like drift around on us. But the next thing we're gonna actually go to is mounting our motor tube. So I always like to get the motor tube mounted ahead of mounting the fins. And that's largely because in case something goes wrong while I'm mounting the motor tube, I don't risk ripping the fins off. So again, we get our motor tube from last time. At this point we can take, or from earlier, at this point we can take the motor out because the structure is solid. And we can kind of start going, I don't really need that piece of tape, and you can kind of figure out what you do and don't need in your housing. Now again, at this point, if you're wanting to put a plug on the upper end, this would be the time to basically cut off the end of an old Estes e-motor that you've already burned, cut off like 1/2 inch and glue that plug in the end here. Make sure it is not the nozzle side, it is the open end of a burnt motor so that you still have a place for the ejection charge to pass through. So then again, we're gonna just do a quick test fit. Okay, it's a little snug there. It means I need to remove some of this tape I was using to hold the whole assembly together. And try again. Alright, and that's pretty much what we want to have happen. So I'm actually going to go ahead and remove one more piece of tape, and then what we're going to do is take some Elmer's glue, make sure I'm on the right end, make sure it's open, run it around the inside diameter, of the body tube, just about 1/4 inch inside there, and then we're going to also go ahead and spread a little bit over the exterior top edge of my motor tube. Basically what's going to happen is as I push this in, it's going to smear the glue down the entire length of the body and seal it in there pretty much permanently. You will end up with an amount of excess that will start coming out around the exterior here. Easy enough to just kind of take and wipe that up real quick. And since Elmer's glue takes a little while to dry, you actually got some time to mess with this and get it perfect. You're not on a huge time crunch. There is a time crunch, but just not a massive one. So then we're gonna go ahead and I'm actually gonna slam this all the way to the table because that's how I want my end to line up. And then you can kind of see what we've got here. I do have a little bit of a mess that I just got on my mat. So that would be probably a good area to go ahead and put a piece of paper underneath it before you slammed it down. Hopefully you're not following along with me. Otherwise you just made a mess too. And so what we're going to do is we have that. And I did just realize that I did not ever add my motor retention into this. So motor retention, I actually just took a paper clip and bent it into an L shape here at the end, and my plan is quite literally to just find a spot where I can shove this up the side. Oh, there we go. And that'll actually end up working. I'm going to be able to do this post, so that's good to know. We're gonna just basically shove it on in there, and I'm actually not able to get it in as far as I would have liked, which is not the end of the world. I'm just gonna basically end up bending it further out than what I was thinking. So to actually show you how I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna go ahead and take it here, go ahead and press over, pull my motor back out, pull that out. I'll make a harsh 90, and then I'm actually going to go ahead and add an extra feature back into this for my own ease moving forward. This is not going quite as well as I'd hoped. Let me grab a pair of nippers. And this part's very much just kind of subjective to how you designed your setup. My setup's just deciding it wants to be a little more difficult. So I've got this little L shape, and then what you can actually do to hold it in there is take some Elmer's glue and run it down along the side of it and let that kind of seal it in there. And the best way to do that is to go ahead and then stand the body tube upright and let it lean down. You can also do it with CA glue. Cyanoacrylate will seal it pretty much instantly, and that'll work great every single time. All right, and then usually right about there, this is a good time to take a break because you're gonna have to go ahead and do some cleanup you've got around your table if you haven't been cleaning up along the way. And you can go get a snack or other things you wanna do. You've got about 2-3 hours before your glue dries completely. And you can move on to fins and other aspects of the build. Alright, so now it's been about a day and we've let our nose cone dry, and we can take all the tape that we put on there to hold everything in place off. You'll find it honestly just holds together pretty well. You might lose a little bit of paper to the tape. That's really not the end of the world. So we can see it just fits together and sits on there really nicely and gives us a pretty basic little nose cone. But we're going to set that to the side and move on to our next task. Our next task is to get these fins attached. For this design, I'm using 3 fins, so I'll have a tri-fin, and I'll need to like mark everything as such. That basically means everything will be on approximately 30 degree? $60 degrees. I think. That seems wrong. It's 120. It's 120. So 0, 120, 240, and another 120 gets you back to 360. So I've printed off a quick compass here. It's nothing really fancy, it's just a very basic compass. And so we'll have guaranteed 1 fin at 0, 1 fin at 120, and 1 fin at 240 to get our 3 fins. And the way I typically mark this is I'll take my tube, figure out where roughly my center is. An easy way to do that is to measure from like the outside edge of your circle to the point where your tube's touching the circle, and make sure that distance is all the same. On like a rough note, I can check that. And so then what I'm going to do is take my Sharpie and mark the tube. So I've gone ahead and marked the tube at the top, and I know that's the wrong end to mark it on, but with this here, we should have marked the tube before I glued it all together. That's usually something you want to do, is actually have like your lines all scribed out for where the fin glues on before you do that. Now there are multiple ways to scribe this fin all the way down the body tube. You can do it with an engineering triangular rule like this, just by setting it on your tube, lining up, and running your pencil line down. You can also do it with a door frame. That's my favorite way to do it when I do not have a pencil on hand, is just to take a door frame and square up in it and scribe the line down the body tube. But we'll go ahead and get the line most of the way down the body real quick. Try and actually get it all the way down. And you'll see we now have our 3 lines around the body, giving us where our fins are all going to stay. But now we've got to come up with some way to like actually hold the fins here. And like Estes would tell you, oh, just glue it on and with a little bit of tape hold everything in place. There's a bunch of fin jigs you can buy online, and there's a lot of different ways to do this. Those get kind of annoying in my opinion, when it's like, oh, I could go buy 1,000 things, or real quick, I'm going to teach you how to make a fin jig. I've done this before in other videos, just how to make a quick fin jig, and it's pretty simple. We're going to use a flat piece of cardboard here, and again I'm using more of my filament box. And usually you'll want to make 2 of these, you won't want just one. But we're going to go ahead and basically make a circle with the bottom of our rocket. That gets us some information. Then the remainder of the information we care about comes from our scribe. And I'm going to punch holes at my marks. So basically, I can find the center of my hole with a handful of off-edge marks. I'm actually going to draw a tangent line So that didn't quite work the way I wanted it to. But we're gonna try and find center. I'm finding out that my tube is just not perfectly circular, which is causing its own level of chaos on this. So I've decided what I'm gonna just call my rough center, and basically I'm gonna use my pencil and the hole to line it up. Then I'm gonna mark out in those little dots I poked through my piece of paper. Which give me what I call scribe points. Of course, now I'm gonna run into this issue. Those two show up. Why are you not showing up? Alright, there's my other scribe point. So now what I've gotten is a way to basically draw where my fin line is between the center of the hole and that scribe point I put out. And so I've got my 3 lines, and now the next thing I want to do is actually go ahead and figure out how far out my fin comes from the edge of the body tube roughly. Because that'll tell me kind of how I want to cut this. So I'm basically going to want to cut a slot and the center hole out of this jig, and it's most easily done with a X-Acto blade. Again, as I've mentioned before, if you're a kid doing this, please do it with adult supervision. If you're an adult, you're doing this with your kid, like parents, this is the part you have to do yourself. So we'll take and scribe these out. Now I do plan, in a couple seconds ago for you guys, it's been a day or two for me. I mentioned the fact that you can find a lot of this type of stuff online, and I'm actually going to go ahead and put together a posting online where you guys will be able to download things like this fin jig I am cutting out right now, and files to help you with the nose cone. You'll be able to find a 360 tool for marking what you want to mark. I'm going to leave just basically a bunch of tools available to your use as you and your compatriots are building your first home-built rockets. So we want to make this as easy as possible and as fun as possible for you guys. And hopefully this will lead you down the chaos path that is building high-power rockets, and you join us out at the rocket pasture if you're here in the Midwest, or at whatever your local launch site is. So as you can see, we cut out the center there. Tip that up. And now I'm wanting to make sure I get the sides out. I know I should trim down how big this thing is too, because it's kind of unwieldy at the moment, and that didn't quite cut as well as I'd like it to, but it's really not the end of the world. So we'll actually go ahead and just real quick, we'll trim the excess off this box. And I'll get that out of my way. So now we're left with what's a much more reasonably sized piece. So as you can see there, we got a hole with 3 slots. Usually you'd want to make 2 of these. I'm actually going to finish the process with 1 because I am running very low on cardboard at the moment. Unfortunately, some other projects have demanded cardboard. But the next thing you're going to want to do is basically test the fit of it around your body tube. So we're going to end up doing most of this upside down. And I'm hoping I've kept this on screen. I might need to go double check that. But basically what this will allow us to do is our fins can now get like seated in here approximately. And we'll want to line up your lines on the body tube with the slot, since that's what you're trying to use to help align everything. And it's not going to be perfect, but it ought to be really dang close. The reason I'm going to be able to get away with doing one, and I'll kind of show you this, so if you want to get away with only having to make one fin jig, you can. So I made sure that I cut this pretty much exact as I could, and I've got the line to line up on. So when I'm putting this in here, it can wiggle left and right on me, but as long as I line it up on that center line, I'm gonna find it goes exactly where I want it to be. So I can then do that with all 3 of my fins, and I want to test fit them before I get any glue out. Even the slightest bit of glue, I want to make sure I've got all this test fitted. And it may not line up perfectly with all the lines you drew on there. That's not the end of the world. You can kind of adjust it, wiggle it around, get it to where you really want it to be. Fins being a little wonky or cattywampus actually kind of means you're building it right. And so you'll end up with something that looks like this. And when you've reached an area where you think you're happy with the way it's straight, you can then take your pencil and kind of scribe gently while holding everything in place where it all ended up laying to help you put it all back. But from here, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to pull each fin out. I'm going to put a little bit of Elmer's glue on it, set it back on here, and then we're actually going to leave it sitting upright like this to dry. And I'll make sure I kind of try and get a better pan shot of this, because at the moment I unfortunately do not know what this looks like for you guys. I believe it's all in shot, because I believe I'm all in shot. Hey, actually, we're going to cheat here. Hey, lovely assistant, can you tell me if this is actually in shot?
Just barely.
Just the top of it's like, here?
It's the top of your eyebrows.
Yes. Okay, well, my head can get cut off. That's fine. So, glad that is in shot. So we're going to get this glued up and then let it sit to dry, because this is pretty much one of our last steps aside from mounting our launch lugs, which will actually be the very last step to it. So you'll want to set this up to glue. You can do one fit at a time if you want to. I'm going to do all 3 at once because that's my preferred method, is to just go ahead and do all at once. Elmer's glue gives me enough play time that I don't need to like spread out the love. So we'll go ahead and get some glue flowing. And you want just enough to coat the back edge of your cardboard in glue in a way that is visible. It is going to seem like you didn't put any glue to tack this on when it dries, but it is just enough glue to hold it on there. Now what you're going to do is slide it back in the slot. It's going to come in contact with the body, and you're going to smear some glue all over this rocket body tube. That is fine and expected. So get it about where you want it. And then my recommendation, rather than trying to work it where it is rotate everything on over and get your next one lined up. Oh, that was a lot of glue coming out all at once, but thankfully I can spread that out some. So you'll get your glue all up on here. And I will mention, this won't be like the last gluing step. You're still going to have to do a little more work after this. What you'll find is that you'll need to make little, basically glue fillets is what I call them. So you'll basically take your Elmer's glue bottle and generate little fillets with it along the edges, and that will help ensure the strength of the fin on your rocket. If you want to, you can go ahead and mix in some sawdust with it to help thicken it up and make it more of a paste that you're turning into the fillets. It will honestly increase your overall strength of your rocket, but when we're doing these as just kind of fun one-offs, and it's not like a fancy Estes kit I'm putting together. This is good enough for my desire. So we're going to set everything right there, stand it all up on end, verify it's exactly where we want it to be. Oh. Thanks, love. Lovely assistant telling me exactly what I need to do. But you're going to want to check every little fin before you let it sit. And now, a really good recommendation, if you're going to let it sit like this, please do not leave it on your kitchen table. Do not leave it on a table that moves when you shake it. This will fall over. Don't leave it on the ground somewhere where a pet or a kid is going to knock it over. Sorry, kids, if you're watching along with your parents right now. Like, I was good at knocking this stuff over when I was little. If you want to fly your rocket, we're going to have to put it somewhere where it's not going to get bumped or jostled. The whole goal is to protect your rocket as much as possible. But while you're waiting for this to dry, please do go check out my website linked in the description below. There you will find all sorts of goodies for rocketry, including kits that you can buy and fly, parts to help build bigger and better rockets. If you want to mount cameras on the side of your rockets, I've got mounts to help you mount a camera of your choosing on the side. But on there you will find a link to my printables listing. There will also be a link for that down below. On Printables you can find all sorts of files that I have posted for free that you can either 3D print, and some of them are like 3D print and instructional hybrids. So you'll find like zip files in there that when you download the zip file, you will find instruction files. You'll find like what we're going to find with this one, like your compass rose. I'm going to make sure you get the nose cone shape and a couple other just like helpful things as you're going along to build your rocket. I'll probably also include the fins in that, and it'll all be on like one little page for you to quickly print out, including your fin jig guide. There'll be like a second page. You can print that off from the file, and if you have a 3D printer and want to print off a nose cone rather than build it, I'll have a file on there for a nose cone that fits with both this tube and a standard paper towel roll tube, and that's mostly to comply with the printables requirements that all listings have something related to 3D printing, even though the primary content of this video is not 3D printing related. But Printables is a great place for me to be able to drop this information that you can easily and rapidly access when you need it. So check that out, and we'll get back to this when the glue is dried. All right, so hopefully it's been about an hour, maybe a little longer depending on how long you let this sit. And your Elmer's glue should have thoroughly dried at this point. So the goal is to be able to take the fin jig off at this point. So the fin jig should just gently slide off, and your fins stay attached. Now, at this point, the fins are still very fragile. If you're not careful, you will break them back off. I've got one here that's got a pretty decent gap right underneath here, just because I didn't end up cutting it straight. I don't know how visible that is on camera. I'll try and like fluctuate that back and forth. You can see, yeah, right there, you can see through it. So like I'll need to fill that with glue. This one's actually pretty straight. And that one's got a little flare on like the back edge here. Yeah, there we go. You can see the back edge flare. So the way we're going to handle this is actually holding it and putting glue in these edges here to fillet it. Now, the way I recommend doing it is to fillet it one, basically quadrant at a time. So I'll fillet these two, and I'll rotate it. I'll fillet these two, I'll rotate it, and I'll fillet these two. Now, there's a chance, especially with this one that I've got that's got a massive gap in it, that I'm gonna have some glue leak through to the other side. Not a big deal, just kind of wipe it up a little bit, or make sure you come back exactly an hour-ish later, rather than the almost 2 that I've hit, to make sure you get the glue cleaned up before it perfectly hardens. Now, I know some of you are asking, well, how do I like hold it up? And yes, that is your next problem, is how do you hold it up? I'm actually going to go ahead and kind of cheat and reuse my fin jig. So I literally just wedged the end on here, and it will hold it well enough for what I'm doing. If you want, you can prop the other end up to try and like level it out. Leveling it out is not necessary, but it will help your glue not run so much. But we're gonna actually go ahead and kind of try and get this close to level, just to kind of show off what would be the best. I'm also gonna go ahead and start with my worst fin by far, which is 100% the one with the hole in it, which is this guy right here. So, sorry, had to double check the GoPro was recording. I'll basically take it and I'm gonna run fillets, is what I like to call them. So it ends up looking about like that. And all I'm doing is I'm putting the glue bottle pretty much dead in the crevice as far down as it goes, and then I'm just running back and forth to build up a little edge. And pretty much I will wait about 30 minutes to an hour until it's tacky. And also remember, this is washable Elmer's glue. It's listed as no run. Don't know if I've ever actually used a bottle of no run. I'm used to glue running on me pretty bad. I'll see, this one might actually be different than what I usually do. This is also a good time while you're waiting to go ahead and clean up your workbench. Like, mine's gotten pretty dirty in recent days as different projects have taken over my workbench. I will also mention that as we're doing this is about the time when we're going to start messing with our launch lugs. Now, I've got some old paper launch lugs I've mentioned previously that I'm going to be using on this. My other recommendation is to use a straw. Straws cut in 1-inch chunks are pretty much perfect for doing everything you will ever need to do launch lug related. They may be a little larger than what you would potentially like, but that's just fine. So whenever we want to actually like glue these on here, the first thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to use this skewer I pulled out previously for gluing to help me align them the way I want. And I'm going to use a little bit of tape. So just pretty much use one piece of tape to hold it about where I want it at the top. And another piece to hold it where I want it a little bit further down. Now, I don't need to hold it top and bottom. All I really need is just enough so I can locate that one there, and enough so I can locate the bottom one down further on their respective locations. Now, I will be holding these in place just using Elmer's glue. I don't plan to glue them in with anything stronger. And pretty much the exact same way I've been doing all of the fin attachment is how we're going to do this. I am, however, going to go ahead and pull that back a bit. Allow me to get a little bit of glue on our, glue bottle open helps. Get a little bit of glue on there. You can also use a little bit of like CA glue to tack this in place rather than using 100% Elmer's glue. I just like using Elmer's glue. And so I'm actually bending this straw up to keep the glue off the rocket body until I get it just about where I think I want it, which I'm pretty much putting it dead center of the rocket. It gives me some confidence that no matter where it ends up, I'm gonna land within the CG, because usually you want your launch lug to encompass the CG of the rocket. And usually as long as you're at or slightly above the midpoint of the rocket with one, and then at the bottom with a second one, you'll be fine. And also I'll mention you're not required to have 2 launch lugs. I just personally really like having 2. I think it makes everything a little bit easier in the end. So those are how we'll attach our 2 launch lugs. And then we'll also need to do the same filleting we are doing on the fins, but this is one of those areas where we can kind of do a 2 for the price of 1 as we're going around. But then when we rotate this to the next position, it'll give us a good chance to put fillets on one side, and when we rotate to the final position, we'll be able to get fillets on the final side of our launch lugs as well as the fins. And it kind of helps us speed up this process, so you're not waiting now another hour for your launch lugs to dry on. You're kind of using the time these are drying to do those. But I'll be back here in about 30 minutes is what I'm going to check in on it at. I'll let you know if it takes a little longer than that, and we'll keep on with the build. Alright, so it's been about an hour. Things aren't quite perfectly dry on everything, but as you can see, everything has dried up quite a bit. Now, there are a lot of people that will argue we should keep adding glue to it, and I'd be one of them that would argue, yeah, we should keep adding glue to it. So I'll probably add a bit more glue just for personal preference. I'm having that launch lug stick on me a bit. But we're just going to keep going around adding these fillets. And as I'm going to say, do it until you're happy with it. Until you think it's not going to like be a problem anymore. So I'm getting a nice bead of my next fillet on there. We'll wait about 30 minutes to an hour, flip it and do the next one, and we can just keep going till we feel like it's done. Oh, and at the same time while we're here, we're going to go ahead and add a little fillet to these launch lugs. I'll go ahead and show you that as soon as I get it done here. I'm doing the same thing I've been doing to the fins. It's just a little bit thicker. So when you flip this around real quick, you can kind of see that I've got some glue piled up there on the launch lugs, and that's the goal. And I've got the glue in on our fin fillets, and that's what we want to see. So we'll let this sit just like that, and we'll come back at it in a little while. Alright, now last thing we have to do is do one more rotation. Get this mounted on here. And just like that, you're waiting for your rocket to dry on its last set of fillets, and then you're going to be good to go. Alright, so your rocket's now pretty much finished with the gluing. The next step is parachute and shock cord. I've got a 12-inch nylon parachute here. I sell these on my website. This one's actually an old Apogee one I have. I have Top Flight parachutes for sale on my website, and then I've got an old Estes shock cord that's rubber. You can also use like an elastic shoestring if you want to do it, but I strongly recommend you just hit up your local hobby store to get one of those. So you can usually buy these replacement shock cords and like replacement 12-inch parachutes online, but then get basically a 1/2-inch by 3-inch sheet of paper, and you'll want 2 of them because we're going to end up doing this on both sides. What we're going to do is tri-fold that piece of paper so that it kind of makes a little triangle. We'll do it with both sheets of paper. Go ahead and tri-fold it and set the rocket off to the side. We're just basically preparing our shock cord at this point is the goal here. So what we're going to do is actually coat the piece of paper here in glue, quite a bit of it at that, and stick our shock cord down in there, and I feel like I'm skipping a step here. Gonna pinch that together. Try and get that nice and stuck to each other, and then we'll actually end up doubling it back on itself just to try and get really good strength out of it. We don't need a ton of glue, we need pretty much the definition of just enough, and we'll create this little, like, basically packet of paper and elastic shock cord in here for us to use, and that's pretty much exactly what we want. So we'll do that, and we'll do it again. With our other side. Now this does vary a little bit from like a standard Estes kit, because they would not do this on both sides of the shock cord. They would just end up tying it off to the existing the nose cone has a mount point. Unfortunately, our nose cone, because I just made one, does not have a mount point. If you print one off from online, you won't need to do some of this chaos. You'll just be able to tie the shock cord to the nose cone. But because I have a cardboard nose cone, I need to be able to basically glue this inside the cardboard nose cone. Now, we could have done this step earlier on in the rocket build, and I definitely think I should have done this previously already, but I didn't, so here we are. So now, our goal is to let this dry for about approximately 30 minutes, and then we will glue it into our rocket. All right, so now that this is dry, next thing we're gonna do is glue it into our body tube and into our nose cone. And we're actually gonna do this all in one step, largely because I don't feel like doing it in multiple, but my paper is actually not completely dry, and I actually want it that way. It's been about 25 minutes since I did this glue up. And I remembered I didn't actually want this dry, because when I put this in here, I want to be able to flex the paper wad to the side of the body tube. So I'm actually going to put it basically as far down as I can reach. It's all the further down I'm going. And I'm just pushing it in there. I don't know if that's actually going to be very visible at all. Probably not. But I'm just connecting it down in there. And then I'm going to set that off to the side. Take my next piece, coat it in some glue, and then I'm actually just going to go straight up inside the nose cone, like as far as I can, and put it in here. Now the nose cone's also where you'll want to weight things, so if you decide that you want to add some nose weight, you'll want to put either some glue, epoxy, other things up here in the nose. Clay also works really well. But now that we've got that glued to set, that is basically our last step, aside from just quickly tying on our parachute and getting off to the pad. So we can consider this rocket completed. So There are very few steps to get this done. It can take you a couple days to build one of these rockets. It's taken me about a week of just finding the time to sit down to keep this going. Life just has a way of doing that sometimes, but this can be a very fun project for you and a young rocketeer to sit down and do in a weekend, or if you're just looking to push into your first scratch built rocket but don't want to go the full like off the deep end, you can build this with the stuff just you have lying around your house from various hobbies and other things you've been doing. So if you're interested in checking out more, please consider subscribing and seeing all the awesome work we do here on this channel. We've got all sorts of fun projects coming up, including my level 3 cert, some more 3D printing content, and all sorts of weird stuff. And you just really never know what's coming next. It's kind of whatever I get interested in at that time. So I look forward to seeing you back here. I'll see you all in the next video, gang.